Thanks. That song really seems to capture something that many of us experienced in education, didn't it? I think it's changing, though. I think gradually we're kind of getting a little bit wiser to the uniqueness of human beings and how every child needs that opportunity to kind of take it all in. And today, again, I'm going to focus for this lesson for those of you who are under 40 on how to train your parents. Once you are older than 40, your parents are untrainable. Not true. I think it's still possible. I was with my mother this weekend, and I think I'm working on her. I'm still working on her. 76, but there may be some changes yet. How we as children, and those of you who are younger children than me, work at training our parents is something that takes a lot of patience. Because, you're going to probably have experiences with your parents that, they have their way. They picked up their way from their parents in a lot of cases. And sometimes the way that they picked up, you just have to learn to forgive. It's just the case. There's a lot of things about what shape us as human beings that we don't get a lot of choice over. And so I think about my father, who is, to use the word nerd is an understatement. He grew up, he's got a master's in physics. He thinks with this scientific mind. Everything about him is very technical and analytical. I grew up with this, and I hated it for years. For years, I thought, why couldn't I get a cool dad? Who knew anything about baseball, who could even really, get into some of the sports stuff that I wanted to get into. I thought, if I could just get a cool dad. And so finally, somewhere in my 20s or maybe early 30s, I finally began to forgive him for being who he was. Later, I began to discover, wait a minute, he might be able to help me with some computer issues I'm having. Little did I know that nerds would be the jocks of the 2014s, right? It's all changed, hasn't it? You never know how things are going to turn out, but one thing I know is often what we experience when we're growing up are these tensions that we have, wanting to have our own way, wanting to somehow get our part of life, and we struggle to get it. Sometimes we struggle with siblings, competing, trying to get love and attention, trying to get the blessing. Or sometimes we struggle just to try to get what we want. A little more freedom, a little more stuff. These competitions that grow out of our childhood often involve tensions with parents. You got to train parents if you want to really get to that place of freedom. And I'll tell you, the secret to training a parent is to really kind of train yourself. Like I said last week, most of the dynamics that I see for families where there's a lot of tension and stuff happening really has to do with a process that's natural to life. We as human beings start off needing help. From the time we're the tiniest beginnings, we are dependent on somebody to look after us. And during the course, from somewhere between 0 and 18, we are designed in this culture somehow to become self-responsible. And the challenge is that along that way, we have differences of opinion with those parents of ours about how much responsibility we are ready to take on for our own needs. Don't we? Did you have those issues? I had those issues. I was ready to take responsibility for my life full time by the time I was 5. It's like, thank you very much. I know you care about me. I know you want to look after me, but I'm fine. I could probably feed myself. I might be able to find shelter. I have a tent. I had lots of belief that I could manage on my own. You know, I didn't need your protection. I'll just be independent. Almost all of the struggles with parents, in my experience, have to do with that movement that's natural to all human beings, that we have to move from total dependency to some sense of independence. And that really requires that I take on the responsibility for my needs that are being cared for by my parents from the beginning. What becomes a problem, and this is the key to training your parents, is don't wrestle with them about these things. What happens when I begin to wrestle with my parents over me taking back or taking on the responsibility for my needs from them is they begin to sense that I am really not ready to take on responsibility for that, the more I wrestle with them about it. Instead, what we have to learn as kids is how to train our parents to give us the responsibility as we are ready to take it on, as we are ready to be responsible for it. And that is a little harder, because what it means is I have to become a little bit more aware of what I need and think about how I'm being responsible for it, and then show in a positive way rather than a negative wrestling way how I can do that. And the more I show that, this is the secret, the more my parents will kind of relax and they'll go, oh, I didn't know that you could do that. Well, fine. Take responsibility for that, because I can see that you are capable of that. I see a lot of disbelief on the eyes of parents. Has there been evidence to the contrary of this? I know there has in my life. Often, responsibility isn't something that we think about as kids. Independence is what we think about. But independence is responsibility. So there's an old example, and I want to show you this, because if you take a string off of a guitar, okay, I won't do it. But if I were to take a string off of this guitar, and I had the string in my hand, and I was waving it around, imagine that. I've got one string in my hand, and I ask you this question: which string is more free? The string in my hand that I'm waving around, or the string on that guitar? Which one's more free?
The one in your hand.
We have a difference of opinion. Well, some people might say it's the string in my hand that's more free, but the question is, what's it free to do? Well, it's free to twirl around. Now let me ask you this: would you rather be a string that's free to twirl around, or a string to make music? See, the string that's making music is free to make music because it's strung in a tension between limits. So when I accept certain limits in my life and begin to say, I'm going to live in the tension of these limits, I become free to do things that I can't do otherwise. We sometimes think as kids, and I'm speaking as a 12-year-old right now, that to get free is the goal of our lives. But the question is always, free to what? Are you free to develop the kinds of skill and expertise and human connection that will make you a success for the rest of your life? Or are you simply not getting free to, but free from? Almost all movements of human energy that moves as a way to get free from stuff ends up discovering that they get attached to another set of limitations that are only another set of prisons. It will help if, as a kid, you begin to think about, what is it I want to be free to do, not what I want to be free from. Now, when I was 12, I thought, I want to be free from my brother. It was paramount in my life. I want to be free from my older brother. The reason for that was I followed him in school, in the same elementary school, and he was a straight A student and I was not. And so every teacher I encountered would say something to me like, you know, your brother was or wouldn't have or whatever. And so my experience of having grown up as the younger brother was always to feel like I was in his shadow. I just wanted to be free from being in his shadow, right? I didn't ask, what do I want to be free to do? If I could have asked that question, I might have discovered that what I wanted to be free to do would be to find my own special gifts that were different from his, to discover what it was that I had that was really particularly a talent and gift of my own, which clearly at the time was not studying history. Though I did fine. But to always be compared is to always feel some sense of criticism, and I wanted to be free from that. What happens as we grow older, as kids, we begin to learn that there's actually a gift in that criticism. What feels like it must be defended against when you're younger. I don't want to hear any criticism. Don't tell me what's not good with me. I want you to tell me everything that's good about me. And don't tell me anything that is not good about me. Because I want to have high self-esteem. I want to feel good about me. Well, feeling good about me may be great at the moment, but in the long term, if I don't get some feedback that gives me some good insight into things that aren't working in my nature, then I am going to become somewhat crippled through my life. The more I defend against those voices in my life that have something to say to me that say, think twice about this. Maybe you ought to rethink how you're doing that. The more I let myself listen to some of those voices without losing my sense of self, without losing me, the more I find myself able to grow and become more and more capable and learn. No one becomes skilled at an instrument like that excellent guitar solo that Brad played on that fabulous Pink Floyd song. I'm telling you, I looked out in the audience, there were several people having flashbacks. And in the hallway too. And that kind of skill doesn't come without getting some critique, right? It's in the tension that we live with parents and with siblings that there's this crucible that helps us define and learn. When that gets broken because we can't allow it to happen because we feel too criticized, we feel like it's too toxic, we become comfortably numb. We find ourselves not growing, not changing. If you want to train your parents well, a part of what you have to train them to experience of you is a child who is open to learning. When I, as a child, become closed to learning, I set off all kinds of alarms in the head of my parents. I'm training my parents not to think that I need more help. It happens not just for kids and their parents. This happens in marriages too. When we become numb to the input of our partner, often we send signals to the partner that we don't get it. And what happens? Our partner will begin to amp up and become more upset, more worried, more expressive, because they don't sense that we're taking it in. Okay, we get this one, right? I can move on? Okay, so last thought about how we might think about training our parents a little differently. Not only do we have to kind of recognize that our parents are shaped by their own upbringing, their own forces, and therefore we will need to sometimes be able to forgive who they are and the way they approach us and speak to us. And we may have to learn how to shape our own experience a little bit differently from them. And not only do we have to learn somehow in our own journey to find the limitations that fit for us so that we can resonate in our own particular way, but we also have to begin to recognize that the journey of becoming an adult is about moving from being child and parent to finding equal ground. I'll tell you a quick story. One of my favorite experiences of taking families out to have experiences has been taking them rappelling. I used to do this all the time. I had a whole set of ropes and all that stuff. I've quit doing it. I think insurance had something to do with it. It said, maybe you shouldn't do that anymore. But I used to take groups all the time. We would go up, down, we'd all different places, but down in the green belt in Austin, there's some great bluffs where you can climb up, and then you hook onto your rappelling gear, and then you lean out over the side of a mountain, and you begin to lower yourself down with someone holding a rope from the top or the bottom, depending on how we did it. Fascinating. I watched families sometimes who had had lots and lots of conflict and lots of unhappy feelings, but when they got together to rappel and saw Dad going down the side of the mountain and saw Mom going down the side of the mountain and then Junior going down the side of the mountain, there's something equalizing about fear. When everybody's having an adventure together, when everybody's facing their own challenge, we are on the same field. There's not just a sense of parent and child, there's a sense of we are all connected in some even deeper way. We are a family, but we're all together, we're all connected. I often think that if you as a child or an adolescent want to train your parents, your best bet is to get them on a roller coaster at Six Flags, or take them to a haunted house and share that experience. Whatever experiences that you have that you find exciting, introduce it to them. And somehow, when you play with your parents on the same things that you like to do, there's just some magic that happens, because you see what they really want, what parents really want, is to feel connected to you and to share in that connection. And somehow it helps. Somehow it helps with the tendency that families have to develop some resistance to your becoming your own person, to your moving into your own. See, parents really want to hold on to you sometimes because they like having you around. But that whole relationship during the journey is to transform into being two people who share in life together. And to rob yourself of that because of the wrestling that goes on is to really impoverish your life. And some of us have experienced that. We've had to go and find family in other places, and we discover the richness of relationships that can be such family to us. But I think most of us who've had that experience would look back and they would say to you, if you can possibly do it, find a way to keep that connection, even through the wrestling, even through the journey of having to try to find your own path. And maybe the way to do that is to consider how what you need right now isn't just freedom, but it's learning to be responsible for yourself. It's a journey that'll happen. It'll happen eventually. Do it in a dialogue with your parents. One last story. I had a daughter. I started doing this when she was 12. We started having family meetings twice a year. We would have a family meeting. It was awkward at first. She didn't like having family meetings. It felt like what is this, like a board meeting? Family meetings? Are you kidding me? It felt too formal. We'd have a family meeting and we would sit down right after Christmas and right after school got out every year till she graduated high school, and we would talk about, what do you need and what do I need? What do we need? And how could we make agreements that support each other's needs? And at first it was stuff like, she wanted more money and she wanted a later curfew. And, I wanted her to babysit her younger sister and keep her room clean. Stuff like that. But we made agreements, right? Because what I wanted as a parent to teach my child to do was to learn how to make agreements and hold up their end. Because I know if they can learn to do that, get their needs met by making agreements with other people that support other people's needs and hold up their end of that bargain, that she was going to be successful in life, because that's how we relate as human beings in this world. More than her just obeying my authority, what I wanted her to learn to do was to make good agreements and be good at it. And so we started doing it, so twice a year. And once we set an agreement, it was set for 6 months. We'll renegotiate in 6 months. That's important, parents, because otherwise that curfew gets renegotiated every night, right? So that doesn't feel good. So you make agreements that support everybody's needs. And so as we made agreements, she began to get more money. We gave her more money. But we also made her responsible for more of her needs. So now she was not only responsible for her little money that she would go to a movie with her friends, but she was responsible for buying her clothes and her beauty products. So we gave her a fair amount more money. She was excited. She had lots of money. But guess what? She started going to resale shops. She wanted to go find money. She wanted to find clothes that she could afford and still have some money left over. She began to be much more thoughtful about how she was managing money. Now, what am I doing as a parent? I am helping teach her how to be responsible for her own needs. That's my job. And her job is to learn and to take that responsibility. And when she messed up, like she came home 10 o'clock instead of 9 o'clock, there was no real punishment. We simply said, okay, you used to be responsible when you would come home at 9 o'clock, and now that we moved it an hour later, it seems to not be working. So we'll just move it back to where you were able to be responsible. And as you show us you can be responsible, we'll begin to do that again. It's all about how do we as kids and parents learn to make agreements with each other that support this process of taking on responsibility and becoming self-responsible people. And that's the journey, because the roots that you live with will give you wings. If we don't get into a wrestling match, if we don't find ourselves in punitive and defensive stances that keep us from wanting to learn anything, if we don't become uncomfortably numb. Every person in this room has a unique gift, has a unique thing to offer the world. We can shape it. We can bring it forth from each other with loving support that holds into tension those things that we have as values, but that gives responsibility for each person to find that themselves.